Going to the store to buy milk seems like such a simple thing, doesn't it? Although I don't consume much milk in my daily life, I can still usually imagine getting out of my apartment and going for a stroll to the nearest grocery store to buy it without fearing for my life around every corner. Get up, put on some shoes and a jacket, open the door, lock it, start walking, enter the store, grab the milk, pay, and leave. It's an errand so simple, hardly anyone gives it a second thought. But what if it weren't so simple? What if your mind played tricks on you so complicated and terrifying that even the simplest process becomes so difficult you dread the experience of having to go through it? Someone made a game about just that, and it's called Milk Inside a Bag of Milk, 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 Inside... Wait, is that right? I may have been confused after having paid my $1 or $2 to jump down the schizophrenic rabbit hole of this little game, but I was certainly not disappointed. And despite it costing about $5 more, I was honestly even more impressed after playing the sequel, the creatively named Milk Outside a Bag of Milk, Outside a Bag of Milk. Created by Nikita Kryukov and published in 2020 and 2021 respectively, these two hidden gems are essentially interactive graphic novels wrapped up in the packaging of video games, taking us on a journey through the inner life of a girl with a certain set of extremely rare, yet still paradoxically relatable set of problems and challenges. There's an awful lot of interesting stuff to analyze in this game, so today you and I are going to become rabbits, and we're going to find out what's at the bottom of the rabbit hole that is milk inside and outside a bag of milk. So what exactly happens in these games? The first original game is short and very basic in its use of gameplay elements, essentially boiling down to an interactive visual novel. The premise, as you might guess, is that the main character, an unnamed girl usually referred to as Milk-chan, can't say I'm surprised, is trying to walk to the store to buy a bag of milk. The most important defining factor here is that Milk-chan suffers from debilitating hallucinations and compulsions that detach her from reality, and we as the player are tasked with being a guide, with the ability to either encourage or belittle Milk-chan in our dialogue as she struggles to make her way to the store, constantly at odds with reality itself. There are only two possible endings. The first one's a jump scare, obtained if we choose to belittle Milk-chan too many times. Looks like you're not helping me at all. The good ending, on the other hand, is obtained if we successfully lead Milk-chan through the store, buying a bag of milk and getting her back home. If we get far enough, there's a sequence where she essentially breaks the fourth wall and we learn more about her, but when she gets home, another horror awaits in the form of the figure of her mother, distorted by Milk-chan's all-encompassing schizophrenia. The plot of this game is very simple and left me with so many questions that I just couldn't help but get my hands on the sequel Milk Outside a Bag of Milk. Outside a Bag of Milk. A game with more complex mechanics, and which I think fleshes out the message that Kryukov wanted to express much more than the original. The sequel takes place directly after Milk 1, when Milk-chan gets home and is told to go to bed by her mother. After another bout of horrible hallucinations, we once again appear as that voice within her head, the only conversation partner within reach of her subjective world. But this time, our task isn't to help her reach the store, but rather to help her gather her thoughts in the form of a set of small fireflies scattered throughout her room. As we find these thoughts, we learn more and more about her, and they all return to the confines of her head, slowly granting her more and more clarity. Depending on our choices, there are no less than 5 possible endings, in contrast to the 2 endings of Milk 1, but the thing they all have in common this time is that they all take the form of a dream Milk-chan has when she finally goes to sleep that night, after both literally and figuratively collecting her thoughts. A dream which is framed as a bedtime story told to her by us, the mysterious voice in her head. Now, let's see if we can't figure out what these games are about. The first game is way simpler than the second one, and honestly, it's in the second game that things get really interesting, so I'll be analysing it a bit more briefly. In the absence of any gameplay features whatsoever, beyond the choice of what to say to Milk-chan, this game places all its focus on presenting a rather simple story. I think the essential idea of it is to immerse us as players not so much in a fun gaming experience, but rather in a specific psychological perspective. It's good policy to be cautious with diagnoses, but it's clear from the beginning in this case that Milk-chan struggles from several detrimental disorders. No pun intended, genuinely. The most evident one is what's likely some form of schizophrenia, but there are a lot of pointers towards other disorders like autism and even OCD, which show up repeatedly. These less detrimental problems are actually the ones that show up first, though, and are shared by both Milk-chan and the voice we play as, at least to some extent. We see examples of this in the very beginning of the game when, at one point, the only dialogue option available to us consists in pointing out the fact that Milk-chan has been walking with 1 foot on the pavement and 1 foot in the grass for the last 50 steps, as if that makes any difference, and how she has to retrace her steps to quote-unquote make it right, so to speak. A compulsion very reminiscent of OCD. Milk-chan's possible autism shows up in her fascination with certain details, particularly structural details. In the store, for instance, she gets stuck ruminating on the idea of milk being inside a bag, losing herself in a kind of trance thinking about it. And on the way home, she reflects on this fascination with what she calls the pyramidal structure of verbal constructions. Schizophrenia is still the most thematically relevant, though, serving as a lens which distorts the content of the game, morphing what would otherwise have been an everyday trip to the store into a horrifying and exhausting workload that pushes Milk-chan to her limits. The lens of schizophrenia transforms the people in the store into shadows and monsters. Hello? Can I? When Milk-chan asks the first person she sees for directions, they curiously respond simply with, "Oh," or at least that's what she perceives. Besides being an example of Milk-chan's hallucinations, I'd like to stop and point out for later that there's actually thematic importance to this, the O serving as a very important symbol we can use to understand the themes of the game, but we'll get to that. After a tedious back and forth, where she tries to get the monster to say something else, we learn that for whatever reason, Milk-chan is afraid of the letter O, and as a way to illustrate this, we're shown the image of a certain black void after she visualizes it for us. Remember, we're just a fragment of Milk-chan's mind, so we can see her thoughts and visualizations. After a few more times, Milk-chan eventually changes her strategy and responds in kind to the shadow, saying "Oh" herself, and curiously, it's at this point that she's able to proceed. The notion that's being hinted at here is that Milk-chan has to face her fears to make progress, represented by her utterance of the letter she supposedly fears so much. But I think there's much more to it than that, so stay with me. Further examples of Milk-chan's confusion with reality show up once she finally gets to the cash desk and fails to understand that she has to pay for the milk she brought. To return to my point about how this game is largely an exercise in seeing things from different perspectives, as players, we can rarely see things from both points of view at this point. Understanding that the cashier's statements are really perfectly reasonable requests that Milk-chan pay for the milk, but at the same time how confusing and scary this otherwise normal situation is for Milk-chan because of the veil of subjectivity isolating her from reality. Also note the ominous dialogue options we have. "You're pathetic," and "they hate you," but also "pay for the milk," reflecting the dynamic between self-loathing and progress. Like the O sequence, these hints point us towards a theme which becomes clearer in the sequel, namely the theme of overcoming, specifically overcoming one's own subjectivity. At the end of Milk 1, our poor protagonist passes by a gas station, deciding that we, as her guide, have proven our value after all, and she sits down on a bench which, in her own words, is the perfect place for a cliché visual novel monologue. Although it's framed as being within her mind, she essentially breaks the fourth wall here, talking to us directly and thanking us for having guided her successfully. We learn the truth of Milk-chan's struggle. Ever since the traumatic suicide of her father, her world has been deteriorating in every area. Day after day is the same. I've tried so many pills that I can hardly feel the difference between them anymore. She expresses her gratitude for all the help the player has given her, and there's this sense of a subtle catharsis at finally being able to vent out her emotions, as if there's this hopelessness that's been piling up and that she hasn't known how to deal with alone. She essentially finally feels understood by someone else who wants the best for her. And things, my friends, get so much more interesting in the second game, so let's go to that now. Milk 2 begins just when Milk 1 ends, after Milk-chan is told to go to sleep by her mother at the end of the first game. Beginning with a visual recap of the events of the first game, good old Milk-chan has been given a real design in this game, complete with a number of facial expressions, adding a layer of relatability and expressiveness, as well as slightly more complex game mechanics, which I think makes this game a lot more generally appealing than the first one. But it's still very clear that Kryukov is ultimately trying to tell a story here, to convey a message, rather than a purely entertaining gaming experience. The first section of the game consists of a set of cutscenes where Milk-chan is making her way to her bedroom. Fittingly enough, the game makes a distinct effort to twist our perceptions of this everyday process into something terrifying, with Milk-chan's overactive imagination and divergent intuition creating all sorts of artificial horrors, like the corpse she imagines it is at the other side of the kitchen door. Towards the end of the section, she looks at the bag of milk in the kitchen, imagining that she's making eye contact with it somehow. As I expected, there was no living corpse inside, but there was a bag of milk I bought today, sitting in the middle of the table, watching me with its unblinking eyes. I stare back. Nothing happens. Although, what did I expect? Gratitude? Nobody would drink milk inside the store, which means I took it from the safest place in the world into the scary unknown. I turn away in shame and leave the room in a hurry. I only bring people trouble. The way Milk-chan manages to twist this non-event into a piece of evidence against herself is telling, and I think it's an essential detail which tells us a lot about how she views herself. The next section is even more telling in this regard, where Milk-chan seems to meet face to face with a horrifying monster that torments her, sniffing her from head to toe, bearing a single claw, thin and sharp like a blade. She suffers various symptoms and vomits thick, milky foam, which causes the monster to grab her by the throat and force her to repeat again and again the phrase, "I'll never drink milk again." If we take the scene at face value, it makes almost no sense at all, but of course what it really is Milk-chan's mother inspecting her and giving her an injection using a syringe, all of it twisted into a horrid vision by her imagination. The foam she vomits up probably consists of milk she's drunk earlier that evening, conveniently not mentioned in her narration. This combined with the fact that she's forced to repeat the phrase, "I'll never drink milk again," and says, "I promised so many times," to me suggests that Milk-chan is actually lactose intolerant, and that the substance her mother injects her with is lactase, or a similar drug which remedies allergic reactions to milk, which might even prove fatal if not dealt with. It might be a little hard to pick up on your first playthrough, but basically what I think is that Milk-chan just tried to commit suicide, and judging by the dialogue, it isn't the first time. This introduction already tells us that Kryukov isn't just trying to tell a story about schizophrenia and the struggles of mental illness here, but also the arguably darker themes of self-loathing and even suicide. Behavior of the mother is also telling, grabbing her by the throat without even removing the syringe from her arm and forcing her to repeat that phrase as if it has anything to do with solving the problem. Milk-chan's life is clearly cursed not just with a myriad mental illnesses, but also with a broken self-image and an abusive mother making no attempts to understand her. The game finally begins in earnest once Milk-chan is alone in her room, seemingly desperate for someone to talk to, a role which is going to be filled by none other than you and me. Or just you, if you play the game yourself. And to unravel a psychological interpretation of Milk 1 and 2, I think it's essential to figure out what we actually are within the context of the game. Though there were hints of it in the first game, it's here that we learn that our presence in Milk-chan's mind is actually the side effect of overdosing some sort of pill she's taken, almost certainly psychoactive. Naturally, I've read the manual. Judging by the pictures, the overdose side effects are the usual headaches, exhaustion, and dizziness. One interpretation of the first game is that what we are as players is nothing other than this, a metaphor of sorts, for the pills Milk-chan takes in hopes of improving her mental state, trying different medicines again and again until she finds the right one and is finally able to successfully visit the store. But I'm not so sure that's where it ends. It appears that our presence as a conversation partner in Milk-chan's mind is triggered by her taking the pills, yes, but I think we can draw some more insight from the relationship between Milk-chan and the voice. One thing that stays consistent throughout both games is the sort of playfully antagonistic relationship between us and her. Many dialogue options consist in essentially throwing shade her way for being hopeless and difficult to work with, and in return she accuses us of being a bully. Yet in the end, our role as the voice is still to guide her. This brings me to another dynamic between her and the voice. Whereas Milk-chan is consistently presented as indecisive and prone to emotional breakdown, the voice is presented as decisive and logical. In fact, it's clear from the start that Milk-chan's perhaps greatest challenge is the fact that she feels like she's never in control. I don't know why, but I thought I'd be able to take control. I was sure I'd be able to change something. After all, I was able to buy milk, you know? My theory about our role in the game is that what we actually are is a sort of representative of Milk-chan's unconscious mind, the part of herself which normally isn't allowed to see the light of day. Some of you may have heard of the psychoanalytic concept of the shadow, the dark part of yourself which is complementary yet adversarial to your ego. Although using that term in this case might come across a bit much, I think that's essentially what we are. The contrast between the two, the way Milk-chan relies on us as a firm voice of reason in her chaotic and eclectic mind, suggests a dichotomy. And I think the dichotomy that's being hinted at is the dichotomy between the conscious and the unconscious. The unconscious usually lays dormant and neglected, but for whatever reason, overdosing on this pill causes it to crystallize, if you will, into the dissociated personality we inhabit as the player. She normally isn't able to access it, but because of the guidance and sense of confidence this part of her can provide, Milk-chan seeks it out the only way she knows how, by taking the pills and having it transform into an alter of her consciousness, a separate yet parallel identity. I think that if we look at the game through this lens, a pretty clear picture starts painting itself. The main bulk of interactive gameplay consists in us helping Milk-chan organize her thoughts. I carefully extract the thoughts that are yet to be fully formed and lay them out on the ceiling in orderly rows. In hopes of seeing the whole picture, I switch them from one place to another, pile them on top of each other, scatter them around. In the end, I throw them off with my hand, annoyed and start over. Always the saving grace, we jump in and give her the bright idea of visualizing her thoughts as cockroaches. Kind of a counterintuitive choice of insect, so Milk-chan picks the nicer option of fireflies instead, but we can still see what's going on here, either way. What I mean is, the whole premise of the gameplay is basically that there's something on Milk-chan's mind, literally, something unresolved that we need to help her solve. But unable to clear her thoughts, Milk-chan curses the fireflies, her thoughts, and they fly off into various parts of the room, forcing us to make up for this by helping her find them again afterwards, scattered amongst various objects in her bedroom. She's unable to sleep because of these thoughts, clearly nagging at her since they're always scattered throughout her mind, never resolved. So our goal is really to help her reflect on them, to help her put them together in just the right way to reveal something about why her life is so broken that she resorts to using her own lactose intolerance as a way to try and escape it. Each firefly is associated with a specific object, and each object brings specific topics into focus, allowing us to examine Milk-chan's character more closely. The topics brought up in the process of searching for the fireflies are of a wide variety, ranging from notes her mother wrote her about the dosage and side effects of her pills, to her experiences with the internet back when she used a laptop. But they all share the one commonality that each time a topic is brought up, Milk-chan constantly gets distracted, forcing us to remind her that we're trying to find her fireflies, metaphorically reminding her to focus on her thoughts and find what they actually mean. This is the central metaphor of Milk 2. It's a kind of therapeutic search for the things at the root of Milk-chan's suffering, hidden away in a place none other than her own mind, projected out into the space around her in the form of the fireflies. A good example of this is when we inspect the laptop. Milk-chan gets very evasive, going on about incoherent hamster analogies and losing her train of thought constantly, only finding the firefly once we eventually force her to get to the point. And so too when we inspect her sketchbook, planning to avoid looking at it because of some content drawn in it that she doesn't want to see. Her plans are averted when gusts of wind turn the pages over, and although we don't get to directly see the contents or learn what it is about the sketchbook that's so scary, it's only when she musters the courage to look directly at it while the wind is threatening to expose those hidden pages that the firefly finally appears. In other words, the fireflies, Milk-chan's unfinished thoughts, are hidden and are only found when Milk-chan finds the courage to face the things she's been avoiding thinking about. The most extreme example is when, after inspecting her backpack, she recalls the last day of school in 3 different iterations. Her description is suspicious, to say the least, and when she tells us about it, each iteration is more traumatic and difficult for her to recall than the last. We learn that Milk-chan's father may not have been much of a better parent than her mother, and based on how she agonizingly retells the story at our behest, it's clear that this memory is something she's tried to repress, just like how she escapes the responsibility of actually thinking through her thoughts by getting distracted in various ways. Again, the firefly shows up only when she is told all 3 iterations at the behest of the voice, always pushing her and giving her this sort of tough love to face reality. The conclusion we can draw is that the fireflies are representations of repressed thoughts and memories in Milk-chan's mind, as well as unfinished ones. The reason she's so distracted and eclectic is because of her ego trying to ignore them, trying to ignore the unconscious, to keep repressing them because of the pain of facing reality. But in the end, it's the kind of thing you can ignore to stay more comfortable in the short term, but in the long term, repressing them makes you stuck in place. There's a lot more to say, but for the sake of time, I'm going to move on now. Once we've collected all the thoughts, a super interesting thing happens. Saying this will be the last time she takes the pill that causes the voice to manifest, Milk-chan asks us for one last favor, telling her a bedtime story. I have one more small favor to ask. What is it? I blurted out too many things today. Things I'd want to forget. I don't blame you, but was it really necessary? And what do we answer? You'll see tomorrow. She'll see tomorrow because collecting these thoughts has opened Milk-chan's mind to being able to see something about herself and her life that she's forgotten and repressed. It's a well-established fact in psychoanalysis that dreams can reveal things about ourselves that we don't consciously know. Dreams are the medium through which the unconscious speaks to the conscious, and what form does this bedtime story take? A dream. In fact, Milk-chan specifically admits that she hasn't been dreaming in a long time. This directly parallels with the fact that Milk-chan hasn't faced all those repressed thoughts and memories in a long time. In other words, the dream that makes up the ending of the game is the voice, the representative of the unconscious, revealing to Milk-chan the conscious culmination of all the thoughts that she's finally finished. She didn't dream before because they never got finished, but now they are. And that brings us to the ending. Now, there are actually 5 endings to this game, each taking the form of a distinct dream, depending on player choices. But for the sake of time, I have to constrain myself to going in depth on just the main default ending. But don't worry, I will say a few things about the others too. Actually, in hindsight, just kidding, I went pretty in depth on all of them, so yeah. As I already implied, what all the 5 endings have in common is that they all take the form of a new perspective. That is, a perspective that Milk-chan, given her oppressed and disorganized thoughts, has been unable to see until now. It's the unconscious literally showing her the things that's been holding her back, using the well-established tools of dream symbolism. The first main ending is the most recognizable and thematic of them all, tying together all the events of the game so far in a way that should definitely ring a bell or two when you watch it. In this dream, Milk-chan wakes up on a bench. In front of her lies a narrow, dimly lit alley, an awfully familiar road. Where could she have seen it? She comes across a boy waiting for her with a weird, if not creepy expression if you ask me. Very mischievous in character, he says he's been waiting for her to come guide him. Guide him to what? To the store, to buy a bag of milk. Seemingly having gained a lot of confidence compared to her waking self, she tells him to do so himself. But he doesn't know the way. Frustrated by his strange antics, Milk-chan eventually gives in and walks to the store with him. A key detail to notice here is how Milk-chan takes on such a different character in this dream from that in her waking life, having become much more assertive and deliberate in her behavior. She's presented as an adult rather than a child. Instead, the boy, whose name is Tresca, is the one who's the child in this dream. We see this with quotes like, "He's so young, yet he's already coming at me with questions like that." Yet, all is not what it seems. He also claims to know all there is to know. And once they reach the store, he makes a joke about how the store owners probably place this sign they see in the window every few minutes to show the time left until closing. But that actually turns out to be spot on, despite how silly it is, as Milk-chan points out. Tresca knows more than his playful and nonchalant attitude suggests. Once they reach the store and are initially unable to find milk, Tresca leaves to ask one of the customers for directions. Tresca lets go of my hand and walks confidently towards one of the store's few customers. That person is standing with their back to us, studying something on the shelf. "Hello, can I?" Where have we heard this before? I can't hear the second part of his question, nor the reply he gets, but my good-for-nothing friend freezes in place, looking the customer straight in the eye. This sequence directly parallels the event from Milk 1, when Milk-chan enters and speaks to the distorted customer. But again, this time, the person showing the way isn't us, the voice, but rather Milk-chan herself, and it's now Tresca who's stuck and at a loss for what to do. Once Milk-chan berates Tresca for his strange behavior, he runs away, and she finds him by the store counter, followed by a long line of customers murmuring, "Leave him home next time." Just as with the O incident, this is a direct parallel to when Milk-chan was at a loss for what to do at the counter, and we as the voice had the option to either help her or belittle her for being pathetic. The last straw comes on the way back home, where the two silently walk back until they pass a gas station, and Tresca asks if Milk-chan likes ice cream. Milk-chan says no, and as Tresca turns around, he looks mischievously at her one last time, saying, "It seems you're not helping me at all." And with that, she wakes up, crying, looking up into her imagination at that great, terrifying abyss. Only this time, she looks at it with awe rather than with fear. That line, "It seems like you're not helping me at all," is of course the line we get if we fail to help Milk-chan buy milk in the first game, by belittling her or failing to give her the space she needs. So what's really happening here is that Milk-chan has experienced a profound shift in perspective. From being a person stuck in her own subjectivity, relying on others to show her the way, she's become the one showing Tresca the way, and failing to understand him and his experience in the process. She's the rational one now, the one who sees things clearly and lucidly and walks normally. Tresca's the one compulsively retracing his steps, just as Milk-chan did back in the first game. It's a direct reflection of the first game, just with the roles swapped. And when we think about the voice as a component of Milk-chan's unconscious, who, remember, is the one telling her this story of the dream all this time, let's focus on what's actually important. Then, just as Milk-chan has become the one guiding the way, the voice has now taken on the role of Tresca to show her the other perspective. If you're really into depth psychology, then we could talk about how Milk-chan has taken on the masculine role of her animus in this dream, but I think I'll let you figure that one out if you're interested. Ultimately, the revelation here is the new perspective that's given to Milk-chan. Not only can Milk-chan see herself from the judgmental viewpoint that people in the external world might take towards her, but she can also empathize with herself from an external perspective. It would be great to see what she does with this information after waking up, but unfortunately Milk 3 hasn't come out yet, and I'm not sure it ever will, so let's now talk very briefly about the other endings as well, and see how they relate to all of this before we finish off. The second ending is known as the phone ending, because it triggers if you collect Milk-chan's phone during the Firefly search. Milk-chan is walking around in different environments with her eyes fixed on her cell phone, texting with somebody, or rather nobody, about her thoughts and her life. She continuously questions the purpose of her existence in what seems to her like a void, talking about how she tries to fill that void with her thoughts again and again. She finds herself in various empty cityscapes which seem to crave being filled by something. It's the type of vibe you get from one of those empty Gmod sandbox maps. She repeatedly dreams of her thoughts filling this void. In the beginning, her thoughts are more tentative. I'm all alone, but at the same time, it feels like I'm not. I can create a whole world with them, my thoughts. I'm sure I'll be able to fill the void around me if I try hard enough. As the dream progresses, her thoughts become more hopeless and resigned, eventually becoming fixed and indignant. I don't care that this place is empty, you hear? I feel neither good nor bad. And at the end, she reaches a stop sign by a train track as her session times out on her phone. This ending symbolizes the endlessness and pointlessness in repeatedly immersing oneself in one's own thoughts, endlessly reflecting on the same things without even realizing that you've had those same thoughts again and again. You haven't progressed any further. Every now and then, there's this pizza-related message giving Milk-chan increasingly better deals. 3 pizzas for the price of 2, and later, 4 pizzas for the price of 2. The outside world has so much to offer her, yet she stays within the confines of her own mind. The message we learn from this dream is that Milk-chan needs to look outside herself. She needs to escape the infinite regress of thought and experience the external world in its own right. The third ending is known as the mirror ending, and in my opinion, it's the one that's easiest to interpret, so I'll go over it very briefly. In this dream, Milk-chan repeatedly finds herself in front of a mirror, and she looks at herself, seeing herself in all kinds of horribly distorted ways, reflecting each time how stupid she looks and wondering what people at school will think. The music becomes more and more distorted, just as she does, until... Good morning. I feel wonderful today. Can't wait for my first day at school. Instead of distortion, she has no face in this version. This is an extremely important detail, and you should take notes here because this is the punchline. This thing, the fact that she has no face, represents the fact that the only way Milk-chan can see herself positively is if she has no identity. Milk-chan's self-image is so negative and distorted that if she focuses in on any one aspect of what makes her who she is, that aspect always appears negative to her. She distorts everything about herself into something negative, a fault rather than an asset. And the revelation of this dream comes in the final iteration of this mirror thing, just after the one where she has no face. Now, instead of seeing her face staring back at her, she sees the back of her own head. She literally sees herself from the third person point of view, symbolizing how the dream has shown her a perspective on herself which she wasn't able to see before. And with that tiny little piece of context, the meaning of the whole dream becomes clear, and she wakes up. Okay, I'm in speedrun mode now, so let's move on to the fourth ending. This one's my personal favorite, actually, just because of the atmosphere of it. Milk-chan now finds herself in a dark room containing nothing but a small door, hearing scary noises from the other side. As she tries to move around in the room, it expands outwards. She avoids the door until all other options are exhausted, but when she reaches for it, it moves away too, and she has to run for her life to be able to reach it. At the same time, as she runs, she sometimes hears someone talking at the other side. At some point, after running for a long time, she finally lunges at the door, but just barely fails to reach it, leaving a bloody trail as she slides across the rough floor. The voice at the other side keeps talking to her. "Are you hurt?" Yet, when she finally reaches the door after running for hours, the voice has seemingly grown terrified of her, telling her to go away just in time for her to open the door and invite a blinding light into the room. But we're not done. Suddenly, after getting to the door after all this time, Milk-chan is now standing in a field under the open night sky. Instead of a claustrophobic room, everything is vast here. She hears a faint echo drawing closer. Ooh. Or should I say, oh. Where have we heard that before? Somebody clearly wants me to find and help them. Maybe they're hurt? She heads towards the sound, but hears a resounding, painful scream, and all of a sudden, she's now scared. She sees someone standing in the distance. "Are you hurt?" she asks. Gaining no response, she turns around to walk, but as she does, the person comes closer, following her as she runs. Eventually, she tires out, though, and she says, "I'm scared here, you know. Why won't you do anything?" Finally, she faces the creature, and as she does, it expands rapidly in the blink of an eye, covering most of the sky in sticky, cold darkness. She runs away one last time upon viewing this horrific vision, but then an unknown force turns my head with a crunching sound, and the darkness consumes everything. I wake up on the cold floor in the center of a cramped room. I don't know about you, but that revelation definitely made chills go down my spine when I played the game, although my very short and oversimplified explanation here might not be enough to do the same for you. The dynamic that's being outlined here, though, is that between Milk-chan's conscious and her unconscious. You might even say her shadow, as that's very much the motif hinted at by this figure in the horizon and the monster it turns into. Like the others, this dream is very much about perspective. She starts off seeing the world from the perspective of her unconscious, locked in a dark room, symbolizing repression. She can hear the other half of herself talking to her at the other side of the boundary. The ego, scared of reconciling with the dark side of itself. But when she escapes, she now suddenly sees the world from the outside perspective, from the perspective of the conscious ego. Yet now, instead of trying to escape into the daylight, she's trying to escape from the same darkness she just tried to unite with. Milk-chan, in other words, fails to accept the whole of what she is as a person, something we also saw in the other dreams. And now she's being shown that what she runs away from or fails to accept is actually just another part of herself. Okay, now finally ending 5. This one is weird, and I don't really feel like I have a completely satisfying interpretation of it, so I'll just lay out some things I noticed. Milk-chan finds herself on a spiral staircase, circulating around a vast pillar extending infinitely in both directions. Initially, Milk-chan stays close to the wall, trying not to move, but as time passes, the place starts to tremble and more identical pillars appear around her. Foreign thoughts seem to invade her mind, replacing any hope of coherence with a jumbled mess, and Milk-chan loses control of her body, forced to move and given the choice only of which direction to walk, up or down. She decides to descend. There are many motifs here which are interesting to take note of. The way the stairs loop around infinitely remind us of the endless thought loop presented in the phone ending, where no matter what direction you go, the same empty and meaningless void will find you, repeating itself again and again. The jumbled thoughts evoke the sense of being scattered and lost in a sea of distraction, and the feeling of being out of control of one's life. All things Milk-chan struggles with. And the last of these jumbled thoughts to appear in Milk-chan's mind before she wakes up is also interesting. Do you get it? Do you get it? Yes, even you get it. When you notice how people look at themselves in the mirror, when you look at your own reflection and realize it exists in reality, do you understand how exactly it exists? This quote hints at the idea of your self-image being real, in the sense that if you believe in it, it inevitably starts to define your life, similar to the mirror ending. It's real insofar as it defines how you think about yourself, and we know that's something Milk-chan struggles with too. The reason why Milk-chan can see nothing but an infinite abyss in both directions is because her current idea of what she is and what the world is locks her into a world where meaning is absent. But I'll leave a more cohesive interpretation of this last ending to you, my faithful viewer who has impressively watched so much of this long-winded video. And to end on a little bit of an abrupt note, that covers it. With all these endings in mind, as well as the games as a whole, it's clear that Nikita Kryukov isn't just telling us a story about the sort of enigmatic struggles of having schizophrenia, but is also appealing to a number of deeply resonant themes we can all relate to. It's the struggle of being stuck within the confines of your own mind, whether that be because outright hallucinations eclipse objective reality, or because of the much more relatable problem of being stuck in one's own perspective, thinking the same thoughts even though you know very well that you won't reach a different conclusion. So the universal human theme of these games is the question of perspective. Without external reality, without other people, you could say, we're at risk of losing touch with the meaning in our lives, and even the idea that there can exist meaning because our horizons are limited by our own narrow-mindedness. Truth can become clouded and lost, the fireflies can scatter and hide, and because we no longer see them, we stop believing that they even existed in the first place, and everything then becomes a dark void. But all we need to regain touch with reality, all Milk-chan needs to find hope in her life again, is one single viewpoint different from her own, whether it be by empathizing with herself through the eyes of someone else, as with the main ending and the relationship between her and Tresca, or it could be through the eyes of her own shadow, as with the room and field ending, where she views the world through the eyes of both her conscious and the unconscious. Because that single viewpoint that she gains in that case has the potential to reopen those horizons she thought she could never see again. Milk 1 and 2 aren't really about schizophrenia at their core, it's just that Kryukov uses schizophrenia to express this deep truth and to make it more lucid than it could have been otherwise. When you look at your own reflection and realize it exists in reality, you at the same time realize that the reason you suffer is because you've been a slave to it. A slave to your own subjective point of view. But when you do realize that, all the emptiness and meaninglessness that permeated your life before gives way to the realization of how delusional you truly were. A kind of catharsis, just like the one Milk-chan experiences when she wakes up from the dream, no matter which one it is. And after that, you'll think, maybe the world wasn't so dark and devoid of meaning as I thought it was. Maybe I too can find a way to be happy in spite of my faults and in spite of everything my life has been up until now. So, if you ever feel like life is sad and meaningless, maybe you should go ask a friend about it, or at least finish your own thoughts about it before you start asking your own reflection. Because reflections are notoriously good at just that, reflecting the sadness and meaninglessness right back in your face. I originally wanted to make this video short, but I can tell that I failed, so I'll try harder next time, but I can't promise anything. In any case, these games were super interesting and I really enjoyed analysing them, so thanks to TankFaiku7488 for suggesting it. Anyways, thanks for watching all the way to the end, truly, and I'd love to hear any thoughts or suggestions in the comments as always. And I'll see you all next time.